Hi everyone, welcome to Mr. Wagid's math class. Today we will be solving equations that include absolute value, graphically using a number line or algebraically using two linear equations. So what is an absolute value? An absolute value of a number is its distance from the zero. So what's the absolute value of 3? It's equal to 3 because 3 is 3 spaces away from 0. Look at the number line, and here is the 0. If you go to the right 3 spaces, you end up at 3. So the absolute value of 3 equals 3 because 3 is 3 spaces away from 0. What's the absolute value of negative 3? Now, from 0 to negative 3, it's also 3 spaces. So negative 3 is 3 spaces away from 0. So can the answer of an absolute value be a negative number? No, because the distance or number of spaces cannot be negative. Now, can you find the solution of an absolute value of a variable using a number line? Such as the absolute value of x equal 4. Which two numbers make the distance equal 4 or 4 spaces away from 0? Here's the number line. Start from 0, which is halfway between the solutions, and go to the right 4 times, or 4 spaces, and you end up with 4, and positive 4 is 4 spaces away from 0. Now, if you start from 0 and go to the left, count 4 spaces, and you end up with negative 4. Negative 4 is 4 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of x equal 4, x has two solutions, x equal 4 and x equal negative 4. And that takes us to two properties for absolute value that you're going to be using from now on. The first one states that the absolute value of any number has to be more or equal than 0, which means they're only positive numbers. And the other one is the absolute value of a number equal to the absolute value of the negative of the same number. Here's the equation. The absolute value of ax minus b equals c. B represents the halfway on the number line. C represents the distance to the halfway on a number line, and the minus shows the direction whether you're going to the right or to the left on the number line. So let's see if we can solve this absolute value equation that says the absolute value of x equal negative 4. So think on the number line, which numbers make the spaces or the distance negative 4 away from 0? Distance cannot be negative, so there's no solution. Now, how can we solve absolute value equations algebraically? If you follow those easy 3 steps, I know you'll get it right. Step number 1 is to isolate the absolute value on one side of the equation using inverse operation. Step number 2 is to write the two linear equations and then solve for that variable using inverse operation. Step number 3, make sure to check your answer. So let's practice with this easy equation first. The absolute value of x minus 4 equals 6. To write the two linear equations, do not use the absolute value, leave it without the absolute value. And remember, one of the properties we talked about, that the absolute value of a number is the same as the absolute value of that same negative number. So to set up your two linear equations without the absolute value, write x minus 4 equals 6 and x minus 4 equal negative 6, and then solve for those two equations. Let's start with this first one. Use the addition property of equality to isolate the variable x because you're subtracting 4 and the inverse is addition. So add 4 to both sides, you end up with x equals negative 2. Now the second one, x minus 4 equals 6. Use the addition property of equality. That states if you add on both sides, it keeps the equation balanced. So add 4, you end up with x equals 6 plus 4 equal 10. So this equation has two solutions, x equal 10 and x equal negative 2. Now check your solution and make sure it's right. Your solutions are x equal negative 2 and x equal 10. Using the original equations, Substitute the value of x in the original equation with the absolute value sign this time, because the original equation is the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 6. Now put a question mark and substitute 10 instead of x. You end up with 10 minus 4 still in the absolute value. Does it equal 6? So make sure you keep the question mark because you're still checking. 10 minus 4 equals 6, but it's still in an absolute value. Does it equal 6 on the other side? Now evaluate that absolute value. And the absolute value of 6 equals 6, so it is balanced. Write the original equation, x minus 4 is still in the absolute value, so make sure you still have that absolute value sign. Does it equal 6? It's still in the absolute value. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6, still in the absolute value. Does it equal 6? Evaluate the absolute value and make sure you do that. The absolute value of negative 6 equals 6. Bring the equal sign down, equals 6, and it does balance. Now graphically look at the equation. The absolute value of x minus 4 equals 6. If you remember ax minus b, the absolute value equals c, where minus gives you the direction. Now you're not starting from 0. You're starting from 4, so you're sliding to the right 4. Halfway is 4. Look at the number line. Start from 4. 4 is halfway. Now count 6 spaces to the right, and you end up with 10, and 10 is your solution. And if you slide to the left, and if you go to the left, 6 spaces, you end up with negative 2, and those 2 are your solution on a number line. Now let's solve this word problem and see if you can write an absolute value equation. In a cheerleading competition, the minimum length of a routine is 4 minutes and the maximum length of a routine is 5 minutes. Write an absolute value equation that represents the minimum and maximum length. So what information they gave us to write the absolute value equation? You need 3 information to do that. The first one is the 2 solutions. Did they provide that? The halfway and then the distance. If you know any of those 3, you'll be able to write the equation because they will lead to each other. So they gave you the minimum 4, the maximum 5, and those are your solutions. And halfway is between 4 and 5. So what's the middle or the midpoint between 4 and 5? It's 4.5. So halfway is 4.5. Now the distance that I need to find, think about it. From 4 to 4.5, what's the distance? 0.5. And from 5 to 4.5, also the distance is 0.5. Now look at the graph that shows the minimum length of 4, the maximum length of 5, 4.5 is the halfway, and 0.5 is the distance between the solution and the halfway, solution and the halfway to the left of the number line. So to write the equation, I have the halfway and I have the distance. The minimum and maximum are the variable x. So write your equation, x, which is the minimum or the maximum, minus that shows direction, and you're going to the right or sliding to the right, 4.5, which is halfway, equals 0.5, which is the distance. Solving equations with 2 absolute values. Look at this equation, ax plus b absolute value equals cx plus d, it's an absolute value. The 2 linear equations that you need to solve those absolute values are the first one without the absolute value sign, so ax plus b equals cx plus d. The second equation will be ax plus b equal negative parentheses of the cx plus d. Why? Because you have to distribute that negative over the 2 terms in the equation, not just the first one. Okay, now look at this example and let's see if we can solve those 2 absolute values. 5x minus 2 equal 5x plus 4, they both in absolute values. You need to write the 2 linear equation that goes with it. The first one is to take the absolute values away and just write it the way it is. 5x minus 2 equal 5x plus 4. But the second linear equation, you need the negative parentheses. So you write the first one, 5x minus 2 equals the negative parentheses of the other expression, which is 5x plus 4. Now let's solve the first one and see what happens. Bring the 5x minus 2 down equals negative, there's no number, so put a 1 there, so negative 1 time, distribute the negative 1 over the 5x and the 4. So negative 1 times 5x is negative 5x, and negative 1 times positive 4 is negative 4. And if you don't know how to take the sign with the number, bring the plus down, and negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Adding a negative is the same as subtraction. So all I do is take the sign with the number. It's much easier. Negative 1 times positive 4 is negative 4. Now, negative 5x, the inverse operation is to add 5x, and which is the addition property of equality. 5x to both sides, and you end up with 5x plus 5x is 10x, minus 2, bring it down, equals negative 5x plus 5x is 0. Bring minus 4 down. Now get rid of the 2 using the addition property of equality to isolate x. Add 2 to both sides. You end up with 10x equal negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. Now you need to get rid of the 10, and the 10 is multiplied by x. So use the division property of equality. That states if I divide on both sides, it's still equal. So divide both sides by 10, and you end up with x equal negative 0.2. Now let's solve the first equation right here. 5x minus 2 equals 5x plus 4. Use the subtraction property of equality that says if I subtract 5x from both sides, the equation will still be equal. Now 5x minus 5x is 0. 0 minus 2 is negative 2, so bring the negative 2 down, equals 5x minus 5x is 0. 0 plus 4 is 4. Does negative 2 equal 4? No. Negative 2 does not equal 4. So that's a false statement, which means this side does not have a solution. You end up with only one solution, that is x equal negative 0.2. Now check your solution to make sure that negative 0.2 is the right answer. Substitute x with negative 0.2, you end up with 5 times negative 0.2 minus 2. Make sure it stays in the absolute value sign. Does it equal with a question mark because you're checking? The 5 times negative 0.2 plus 4, also in an absolute value. Now 5 times 0, negative 0.2 is negative 1, minus 2 still in the absolute value. Does it equal, so question mark, the absolute value of negative 1 plus 4. Now evaluate inside. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. Make sure it stays in the absolute value. Does it equal negative 1 plus 4 equals 3? Make sure it stays in the absolute value. Now evaluate the absolute value. So the absolute value of negative 3 equals 3. And the absolute value of positive 3 equals 3. Both equation is balanced, so it is the correct answer. Now here's the last example for today. Solve the equation, check your solution. The absolute value of x plus 6 equals 2x. Write the two linear equation. One is positive without the absolute value, and one with the negative 2x. Now solve for x. The addition property of equality, add 2x on both sides. You end up with 3x plus 6 equals 0. Now get rid of the 6 by the subtraction property of equality. Minus 6 minus 6, and you end up with 3x equal negative 6. Division property of equality, divide by 3 both sides to get x equal negative 2. So the solution is x equal negative 2. Now let's solve the other equation. X plus 6 equal 2x. Subtract x from both sides. You end up with 6 equal x. Now check the solution to make sure they are correct. This time you need the solutions, which is negative x equal negative 2 and x equals 6. For the first one, x plus 6 in absolute value, does it equal 2x? Substitute 6 instead of x. So the absolute value of 6 plus 6, does it equal 2 times 6? The absolute value of 12, does it equal 12? And evaluate the absolute value, so 12 equals 12. Now the second one, negative 2 plus 6, does it equal 2 times negative 2? Put it in parentheses in absolute value, so the absolute value 4, does it equal negative 4? Evaluate the absolute value of 4 equals 4. Does not equal negative 4, so negative 2 is not a solution. So negative 2 did not satisfy the original equation. We have to reject that solution, and rejected solutions are called extraneous solution. So negative 2 is called an extraneous solution because it did not satisfy the original equation. Always remember to check your solution to make sure there isn't an extraneous solution and evaluate the absolute value. Thanks for listening.